Joining us now, Dr. Rob Wittman, Congressman, Republican 1st District. He is the chairman of the House Military Readiness Subcommittee, and he is also on the Committee of Natural Resources, and he is dealing with the potential Puerto Rico super bailout, which is called super bankruptcy, very convoluted. Dr. Wittman, good to have you back, sir. You got a lot going on.
Yes, John, quite a busy week. We have this morning the markup on the Puerto Rican Bail-out Bill. I have deep concerns about it. To be right up front about it, I cannot support it. I believe that there are remedies through the court system for the bondholders in Puerto Rico. I understand that they are a territory and that under Article 4 of the Constitution, we do have the ability to do things concerning debt that they take on. But, John, I believe the better role for Congress is to do things to help the Puerto Rican economy grow, to do things like help them bring down their energy prices, to make it easier for to flow in and out of the country, to make it easier for them to actually grow their economy rather than create a situation that I believe doesn't do them any good, nor does it do the United States any good. So I believe that our best role is to allow the current situation with the courts to continue. That I believe is where things best rest. I have the debate today about the bill. I know that there are some members there that think that Congress should take the role here since this is a territory, and you can say that the United States government can act, and some folks draw a parallel to what happened back in the 90s with the situation in Washington, D.C., where they created a control board because Washington, D.C. took on too much debt, and the control board oversaw the operations of the D.C. government. This bill proposes the same thing, to create a control board that would oversee the budget and operations in Puerto Rico. I just believe that this is a situation that should be worked out between the bondholders of Puerto Rico's debt and the government of Puerto Rico, not a place for the United States government to jump in and now take on another aspect of what is a situation that Puerto Rico has gotten itself into. And then, for this situation to say that now we're going to create a control board to direct Puerto Rico as to how to manage their operations and manage their debt, I would suggest that the United States Congress needs to focus inward and focus on us getting a budget, on this nation managing its debt. That should, in my mind, be the first priority.
Why is it that whenever something goes down, Congress's first reaction is to put the taxpayers on the hook to bail something out? Congressman, Puerto Rico, we understand, is $118 billion in total debt. Why should the American taxpayer be on the hook for this?
Well, that's a great question, John. Now, some will argue and they say, well, this bill doesn't require that the U.S. take on any debt. It allows the government of Puerto Rico and the bondholders to restructure the debt. I argue that restructuring of debt under current law, under Article 1 of the Constitution, the Congress sets the rules for how bankruptcies are dealt with. Now, Puerto Rico is not eligible for bankruptcy because it's a U.S. territory. It's not a sovereign state. I do believe, though, that there are elements in this bill that do allow for bondholders to be looked at differently as far as their priority. Under a normal bankruptcy, there's a priority set for the bondholders or for the creditors and how they get repaid. While this bill doesn't address it up front, ultimately it does, and it can reprioritize those bondholders. So it does have some elements of Chapter 9 bankruptcy. Some folks say, oh, it's not Chapter 9 or it's not a super Chapter 9. While it isn't directly, I think it does set the precedence to where if other entities, cities or states face the same thing, I think they could come back to Congress and say, well, this is what you did for Puerto Rico. Why don't you do the same thing for us? I think that there are concerns that I have about it setting precedent. While it doesn't do that directly here, I do think there are provisions there that people could point to and say, well, you did that there for Puerto Rico. They're a territory. You ought to do that for us as a state within the United States, and that I believe does have implications. So, John, I think at every turn here, the mechanisms involved are available for Puerto Rico to address its debt. You look at Argentina. Argentina went through this. Argentina sat down with the bondholders and worked through this. Now, it is a messy process. It will not be easy for Puerto Rico. But all those things, I think, are necessary for us to get to the point where Puerto Rico finally, with agreement with its bondholders and with other liabilities that it has, like its pension system, to come to grips with those things. And just as I was against the bailout of the financial institutions, and I believe that the responsibility for the financial mismanagement should have been placed at the feet of those financial institutions that were at the source of those problems, I believe the same in this situation. I think you have to apply the same principles and say Puerto Rico got itself in this situation. Puerto Rico has to, along with its bondholders, work its way out of this situation. And there are remedies through the court system. They are not the easiest remedies, but I think that they are, in the long term, the best remedies. Remember, I think you got to address this in the long term, John. I understand the short term, and these bonds are being called, and all these things are coming to a head here. But I think in the long term, just like I believed in the financial bailout situation with the quote-unquote financial market crisis, I believed in the long term the best thing was to allow the financial institutions to deal with the bad decisions that they made. I think the same thing has to happen with Puerto Rico.
Well, you made the statement, Congressman Wittman, you said that a long time of just bad fiscal decision-making and bad management, mismanagement, have really led to this. I mean, a bailout doesn't address any of that. I mean, you look at...
No, it doesn't.
Right? Go ahead.
No, it doesn't, John. I tell you, the best thing that we can do is to give tools to Puerto Rico to help them grow their economy so that they can actually pull themselves out of this. It's not for us to come in and say, well, we're going to put all this control board in place. And again, more layers of direction, more layers of government. That doesn't, I don't believe it addresses the situation in the long term. In the best situation, this has to be something that the government of Puerto Rico addresses. I think that's how it's best determined in the long term.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And just adding more layers of government oversight and government control and bureaucracy, I think they got to find a way out of this themselves. And I don't think taxpayers should be on the hook. Like when you go back to the financial bailout that we had, specifically the TARP bailout, remember that, the TARP bailout for the banks?
Yes.
And part of the reasoning for that, Dr. Wittman, is because I was very involved covering that very intensely. I was in Georgia at the time, and we had Senator Saxby Chambliss deep into it. And the argument was that, look, we're going to do this bailout, and then all this nonsense is going to stop. The big banks are going to have to get broken up. We have to extend our community banking system. That's always been the backbone of America. That way, small business people can get more loans. We're not going to be in this mess. 5 or 6 banks aren't going to control everything. We gave the money. We did the bailout. And now it's worse than ever. So the problem is when you give the money and you give people a free ride, there's no reason to change anything. And there are fewer community banks today than there were then when we did the bailout. The banks took the money and they gobbled up all of the community banks in mergers and acquisitions. I mean, it was outrageous. And they did that with taxpayer money. Now, how does that make any sense? Same thing here, right?
It doesn't, John. Exactly. And you see community banks disappearing one almost every day is I believe the number. It's unbelievable what's happening there. And in this situation too, remember that this bill coming for us doesn't prevent at some point in the future Puerto Rico coming back and saying, by the way, we need some U.S. government dollars to help, again, bail us out. So, folks have said, well, this bill doesn't require any U.S. government dollars to be spent. It's really allowing Puerto Rico to restructure their debt. It puts in place this control board so that we force them to manage their budget correctly. I believe, again, that this doesn't address the long-term situation of what Puerto Rico has to do to recreate its economy, to restructure how it functions as a government and to do the long-term things in order for it to be successful. This is, again, one of those short-term fixes, and as always happens, it's a situation where you say, oh, my gosh, we've got to do something. The creditors are going to call these bonds in the next couple of days, and something has to happen. And decisions made at the last minute in haste are never, John, I believe, the decisions that find themselves to be the best outcome years down the road. This is a situation where we have to look at what's in the long-term interest of Puerto Rico. The long-term interest is for them to have an economy that grows, to have a situation where they can address the emigration, the people moving out of the country to the United States. How do we do things to help them in those situations? That, I believe, is the way that we can help best, not by saying, well, we're going to create, again, this another layer of bureaucracy, another situation there where the restructuring of the debt is allowed without determination about, how do you create an economy to help them have the dollars to help pay off the debt. It doesn't make any difference what you do as far as control or those kinds of things if you don't have the fundamentals in an economy that can support paying the debt off.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Wittman, let's get to this Puerto Rican bailout and the number of people on each side. Is this basically breaking along partisan lines, or are you seeing Republicans in favor of it, Democrats not in favor of it? How do you see it breaking out logistically with votes?
Well, John, just with what I've heard in conversations with folks, I think that there are a number of folks on the Republican side that have deep concerns about the bill, cannot support the bill. I think that there are also folks on the other side of the aisle that have deep concerns, very different concerns, but deep concerns about the bill. Some of the other side, there's provisions in there to cap the minimum wage, or actually to bring the minimum wage down to be able to increase employment there to get more people working. Also, I think there's some things that need to happen with government reform there. There are entirely too many workers that are part of the government there. I think they have to manage the size and scope of the government there, too, to make sure that it is sustainable. Those are things that have to happen. So the other side, I think, has some concerns. They're concerned about the control board having too much authority over the Puerto Rican government. I think there's, for me, from a philosophical standpoint, I look at it and say that there's other courses of action that are better rather than creating another level of government there. But I think both sides have some deep concerns with the bill. So we'll see what happens today in the markup in the committee, and then what ultimately happens in a vote on final passage. I've spoken to the chairman, have had conversations with him, some pretty passionate conversations, and they've told him that I cannot support the bill because I have a philosophical difference with how we should go about addressing the issue with Puerto Rico. And I just think that through Article 3 provisions, through the courts, that there are opportunities for this to be addressed. I think that's the best course of action. It will not be the easiest for Puerto Rico, but I think in the long term it will be the best because it will force them to work with all the bondholders. John, there's even bondholders that are objecting to this. So there's concerns on every side. So I think that the best thing to do is for them to go down the road of addressing this through the court system, and for the Congress to look at what are the things that we can do to help them grow their economy. And they've got issues with energy prices there. They have issues with being able to move goods in and out of the country, and the cost of doing that. We need to look at things that we can do to help them grow that economy. That's the way they can get out of this in the long term.
So, Dr. Wittman, let's make the sausage here. Will it make its way out of committee?
I don't know, John. I think the vote will be close. I know that the chairman had an extensive meeting yesterday with Republicans to go through the different parts of the bill. I have read the bill. I still have the same concerns after reading the bill. Again, they're more philosophical than they are with the nuts and bolts of the bill. But the chairman took the time to go through that yesterday so that members understood at least his viewpoint on how the bill was put together. So I don't know how it will end up today. I do know that there are at least 5 of us on the Republican side that have deep concerns. I don't want to express anybody else's vote other than myself, and that I cannot vote in favor of this bill.
How many
in committee?
How many members are on the Committee on Natural Resources?
Gosh, John, that's a good question. I'll have to get that exact number to you. I do not have it off the top of my head. I do know on House Armed Services it's 63, but I don't have a number off the top of my head for exactly the number of members on the House.
So assuming,
Natural Resources.
Dr. Wittman, if it gets out of committee, and I've only got a minute, if it gets out of committee, when do you think it'll be on the floor for a vote?
Well, if it gets out of committee, it'll be on the floor pretty quickly because of the time elements here. So I don't know that it'll be on the floor this week, but I imagine it'll be on the floor the very first of next week if it gets out of committee.
All right, so if it gets out of committee and it's on the floor, make a prediction. Do you think they'll muster the votes to defeat it? What do you think?
I don't know. I think it all depends. There'll be a number of amendments put on the bill today. Some will pass, some will not. I think it depends on how the bill is amended. I think it's a 50-50 shot as to whether it gets through on the floor either. So I haven't heard a broader discussion of things. I have heard the discussion of the members there, and if the members on the committee's concern reflect the general body itself, it'll be a challenge to get it through.
Dr. Wittman, we're out of time. I want to thank you for your accessibility with us and that very comprehensive explanation of the Puerto Rican Bail-out Bill, probably more concise than I've heard from anybody. I appreciate, and all of us do, your leadership on the issue. By the way, Rob Wittman, a candidate for governor of Virginia 2017. Hey, you want to get more info? It's real easy. Go to rob.wittman.house.gov. How easy is that? Congressman, always good to have you, sir. Have a wonderful weekend.
John, thanks so much. You do the same.
My pleasure.